Geyer, members of the committee, no requests have been submitted.
Okay, thank you, Director Williams. Second item on our agenda is the presentation and discussion on the alternative high school A to F accountability system, including presentation and discussion on the working draft components, as well as modeling of the alternative high school data. So we'll turn this over to you, Director Williams. I believe we have a presentation.
That is correct, Chair Geyer, members of the committee. The Alternative Education Consortium Advocacy Committee is here. They will be led today by Wayne Tucker, who is the chair of that committee, as well as Sue Durkin.
Committee, thank you very much for having us back. We really appreciate your interest in this and your request for further data. We, the members of the consortium, worked pretty hard over the last few weeks to pull together a lot of data, and it exposed a lot of challenges and a number of interesting trends, I guess. So I am going to turn this over to Ms. Durkin, who prepared and collated all the data and sent it all to you.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Chair Geyer, thank you again for letting us be here, members of the Technical Advisory Committee. We appreciate that. My name is, for the record, my name is Sue Durkin, and I am with the Alternative Education Consortium Advocacy Committee. And so just to recap, I realize that we talked about this last time, but to recap, revised statute 2302, completion of grade 10. I just want to focus in on just a little bit. So this is State Board says that in order to the completion of grade 10, you have to have earned 2 credits of English, 1 credit of mathematics, 1 credit of science, 6 credits of additional courses. Now, please understand that this was actually 86. So this is outdated even then. So the 1 credit of mathematics, you would not be able to complete grade 10 now with just 1 credit of mathematics, because there are 4 credits of mathematics required. So just as to kind of give context here. ARS 15821 is the age requirement, and this means that we are required by law to accept students through their 21st year. Alternative schools are missioned to serve students who have a documented history of disruptive behavior issues, have dropped out of school, and are now returning, are in poor academic standing, as demonstrated by being at least 1 year behind on grade level performance or academic credits. I wish I could draw a big circle around that. Our primary caregivers are financially responsible for dependents and therefore may require a flexible school schedule, are adjudicated, are wards of the state, and are in need of an alternative school setting. This is the group of students that alternative schools serve. As a result of the age requirement, the 10th grade, etc., students who attend alternative high schools tend to be overaged and undercredited. Often they do not meet the threshold description of completion of grade 10. For context, just to give context with this, as of October 1, and we run numbers on October 1, for all the schools, alternative schools. October 1, 2017 enrollees of a representative member high school had the following credits. And this is just to look at it. The credits in red are those that do not meet the criteria to begin the 12th grade. And these are 12th grade students. This is a 2016 cohort. Again, this year, October 1. Note the red. Those are all behind in credits. The white are clear ones that actually have earned the credits required. The total are the total credits that they have of core classes that they would need to graduate high school. Again, same thing. The yellow bar, you'll note the one out of all the 2017 cohort year, the one yellow bar is the one student in that, as of October 1 this year, who met the criteria of being able to graduate this school year. This is 2018. Notice all the red, not any yellow. We do have some on this page here. So again, the 4 yellow for the 2018 cohort, that's this year cohort graduating year, only 4 of them beginning that year. And this is just one representative school. let's call it LEA2. Of 194 students entering the LEA2 as 12th graders, only 4 had the core required credits needed to begin senior year. That means 3 mathematics, 3 English, 2 social studies, and 2 sciences. That's if they had to do all core credits for their senior year. And this is typical of students that alternative schools serve. So at issue is how to fairly and adequately calculate graduation rate for schools who serve this chosen population. How best to note that students are college and career ready, and in addition to achieving those academics that we need to get them to meet. Currently, and as of the October State Board meeting, this is what was kind of handed off to you all. There are 3 graduation proposals. We like all 3 of them. We would like to have all 3 of them, but to explain, we're just kind of focusing on one, the number 1. There are 3 options, and this is primarily because different schools have different needs. They want to show the opportunity for their school and what would suit them best. Number 1, the graduation rate of students on track to graduate that are within 3 credits of the State Boards of Education established graduation requirements by January 30th, and of those students that are on track who graduate by June 30th. Number 2 is a best of the 4th, 5th, or 6th or 7th year cohort based on graduation rate. That's from the 2014 accountability formula. That's just basically the same thing from 2014. And then 3 is 1% or greater increase of overall 4 to 7 year inclusive graduation rate of year over year until they meet or exceed the state's alternative graduation baseline graduation rate, in which they can maintain or go forward.
So, Chair Geyer, may I ask Ms. Durkin a question?
Go ahead.
So, Ms. Durkin, would you take a question now, or would you prefer them at the end of your presentation?
Sure.
Okay. So, I'm trying to remember the reason for specifying 4th through 7th year inclusive in option 3 was that ADE only tracks us through a 7th year cohort, correct?
Yeah, and not the 8th year, yes.
So that was the reason, because as Ms. Durkin said earlier, the statutory requirement is, or allowance, stipulation is that a student can attend a public high school until his or her 22nd birthday. So there are actually 8th year cohort graduates, but that information is not tracked.
It's not available
by ADE. And so that is one of the advantages of option number 1, is it allows, it's really inclusive of all graduates.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Durkin.
We gathered some information for you all. There was a committee meeting on the phone, and we talked about the focus of mathematics. There's a challenge with math credits in that math is linear, and you kind of need your Algebra 1 knowledge before you can move on to at least Algebra 2 and then geometry. So taking them simultaneously, you can take English 1 and English 2 at the same semester. That doesn't overlap. You can take social studies, you can take American history and world history in the same semester. That's not a problem. Math is more challenging to do that. So again, this is just for context. We collected, for this purpose, we collected some math data, as well as on the sheets that we'll show you later, just of how many credits they'd earned in math only. That's why it says math on there, so as we go through. Representative member school, again, that's LE2. It's the same school. Collected data for students who are within 19 credits of graduating by January 30th, specifically noting that mathematics credits earned skill recovery classes. So that's could be your math 1, 2, and 3 that actually are pre-algebra 1, 2, because they need those skill recovery classes. It's interesting to note, and wasn't planning on talking about this, but the previous screen was October 1 data of 197. Note that this total enrolled by January 30th, again, same school, 326. So that's quite a lot of students that are continuing to come into schools as you go along. So that's, again, that's typical of schools that enroll year-round. And you'll see that as you go through, there are 98 of these that are slated to graduate by June 30th. So the 98 with this credit of just 19 credits for option 1, our graduation rate would be out of 98 for this school. Sorry, I'm not sure if you, and then the math, you see that there's several with the math of 2 credits. The 3 credits and a half, that's reasonable to achieve. There, if you'll notice here, there's a 6 credit. Now that could have been that somebody came into school but they didn't have the skills necessary, so they had to actually have more lower level stuff in order to get up to the level that they need to. Here's a 1 credit that they have 1 credit, but they have 20 total credits overall, but they only have 1 credit of math. And those students are students that come in and they've got, I had the whole screen that they have a lot of elective credits, but they don't have the core credits. Now how do I go to the Excel? How do I do this?
Pick which one. So these
the grad rate.
are the ones. This one?
Yeah,
This one?
the grad rate, that one, thank you. Okay, so this is, again, collected from 12 LEAs. LEAs 1, 2, 3, 4, etc.
Excuse me. Chair Geyer, Ms. Durkin, is this one of the 2 Excel spreadsheets that was sent to the committee? Or is this?
Yes, this is one of 2.
So,
yeah, this should be, you should have this data.
Yeah, okay, I got it.
Okay. I think it's really important to kind of look at this all the way through. You'll see the number total enrolled, number total graduated. This is for 2016-17. Previous schools attended, credits that they earned prior into the 16-17 school years, and the average math credits needed. This is the 2016-17, the top, and then of course the bottom is 2017-18. Using the proposed formula solely with the 19 credits, not looking at anything else, but just if you have 19 credits to graduate. You see that for this one, the LEA 1, there's an average of 1.1 math credits needed and an average of 21.25 credits earned to date. And this story is repeated throughout. This is not, I think this is actually quite telling. As member schools have collected this data for you all, it's actually been quite informative for us to note that we're, as an individual school, we're not alone in who we serve or how behind students are. Some we're unable to gather this information and we're unable to report it. Some were not able to report the ADA, some were. But again, math credits needed, credits earned total. Oops. And this pattern is repeated throughout. And again, you do have this information. And you actually should, and if I'm not wrong, you have the bigger spreadsheet with more. This is just simply summarizing the information there. And LEA 12, again, over 1 math credit needed. And back to PowerPoint. Okay. Noteworthy on that, and what we can kind of point out is that out of all of those, thank you, out of all of those LEAs, the average is still that this is a 2016 cohort. Now, I want to emphasize that because that's a 5th-year senior right there. This is for the 16-17 school year. That's a 5th-year senior. And every one of those had an average of 2016 or slightly below, so 15.98. On average, students have attended 2 to 3 schools prior to the alternative school of enrollment. Now, That also means that they've spooled around. That's just an average. My gosh, we had several that were on that people gathered that we were their sixth school, or the alternative school was their sixth school or fifth school. Very rarely had they only been to one other school, but it happened. On average, about 5 to 6 credits were earned that school year, which is above what they would earn in a traditional school. The average age of a graduate is 19. So again, you're looking at 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And this is simply 12 LEAs out of 140 some odd LEAs. Okay. Wait. I need to go back. PowerPoint illiterate. This one? I need to go to the sheets. So escape? Okay, gotcha. No. Perfect. And then this CCR, right? Okay. So as we were also charged with looking at our CCR indicators, I think this was, hopefully you printed up yours in color because that was the most telling aspect of this. Again, we have the 12 LEAs that were able to report data. And scrolling. It's not.
Scroll down or sideways?
Scroll down. And actually, if I'm going to try to I'll make it a little smaller, but as long as we can get it to scroll. There we go. That'll do. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Perfect. I'll make it a little bigger. Okay, can everybody see that? At least, well, I think really it's the color coding that is most important, because the pink, blue, green, and yellow indicators. Well, I'm sorry, these first ones, not the yellow one. These first indicators are all off the traditional model. And as we go through all of those, and I'm just going to briefly touch on them, you'll notice where the majority of the indicators are. They're in the purple indicator sheet. So our additions are very important. Oh, criminy. Throughout. This is a spreadsheet that was created for the alt ag when we were together to give to our schools to see if we can gather the data. Some of the indicators are no longer in use. We at one point had the GED on there. That's why it's X'd out. But we do have testing for the AZ merit in the upper half of the minimally proficient. And you'll see that even some of that data we couldn't actually add that to some of these graduates.
Why don't you walk them through some of the purple?
Okay, let me try to get them. Thank you. So if you look at the purple, one of the things that we added, well, actually, that's the minimally proficient. We added second language on there because we have a lot of support that indicate that a second language is indeed beneficial in the workplace and indicative of being able to move on to college and career ready. Work study, we did add work study on there with a 0.5 for each half credit earned, because many of our students are already actually working. As part of our mission statement, as far as they might be single bread winners for their home, and they do need to work, and to be able to incorporate a work study program for them is essential. Workplace readiness, again, that's something that we would say you have to be able to know how to do a resume, how to conduct yourself in the workplace, those types of skills that would indicate that you are ready to go into the workplace. Career ready, this is something a little bit more along the CTE lines, that you would have CTE courses that wouldn't necessarily be the CTE as aligned and indicated with the ADE program of study in their CTEs, but like a computer and class that a student takes, even keyboarding, to be able to keyboard in the workplace is important. So those types of courses. Service learning. Many of our schools require that their students have some sort of service for the public, and that's and they have that incorporated into their course study. Again, being able to look beyond self is a career and college ready thing. This accelerated to credit recovery. That's earning a 6.5 or above is, yes, 6.5 or above. The average is, about 5.5 that you would earn at a traditional school. So accelerated learning is 6.5, and many of our students are coming to us that with a background that they've been disenfranchised at schools for some reason, and whatever that is, but then they all of a sudden come to a point and they're ready to get through their curriculum, and they're motivated and they start moving through it. Again, that's indicative that they're ready to move on to their next endeavor, whatever that might be, if that's school, if that's college, if that's the workplace, whatever that you might have in front of them. And then we also added this competitive scholarship. We think it's really important that we acknowledge that when our students do get scholarship opportunities, and a competitive scholarship with a minimum of $1,000, and that's verified by the letter of acknowledgement to the scholarship, or letter of award. Okay. And then, as I said, majority of these throughout have the credits. What is significant with our number, because we do ask for 1 point rather than 2, and that point be a gathering of both. The state board has the red indicators and the blue indicators, and a bucket of red and a bucket of blue. We'd like for it to be purple. That's the point of purple, is that an accumulation of all of it, because all of it is indicative for our students to be college and career ready. The significant point here is coming to that maybe 30 of these students actually have 1 point. You'll see that if you look through theirs, and I have it on a different spreadsheet. I thought it was this one, but it was a different one. Where there's a total of how many actually earn 1 point. And I'll show you that on the next slide. And one of the points on this one, oops, cancel. I apologize for my fumbling on the PowerPoint presentation there. Just going back to the point of the fact that most of our students earn credits at the purple level. And much training will be needed prior to implementation, because what we think is very clear ends up being not clear. And when the records were returned to me, and I know that this is within 12 LEAs, and I know that if we're just modeling this in the 140 schools that we're going to go out to, it's going to be challenging to do that. And this is from folks that are actually involved in the process. So the advocacy committee recommendations are 3. First one is to clarify the grad rate option 1 to read within 3 credits and not need more than 1 required math credits by January 30. As alternative schools are different and one size does not fit all 3 options should be still offered to schools, meaning all 3 of the graduate options should be offered to all of the schools. Number 2, the CCRI to have the statement amended to remove the caveat alternative school additions must be at the alternative high school of graduation in order to collect as much data as possible. Right now it says only collected the way that the state board approved it to go to you all is, and what we had for a public comment was that the additions could only be collected at the alternative school. As you see in the few slides before, how many schools that the students actually go to. And we would like the opportunity to gather as much data for that student, since we're also trying to get them academically to where they need to be, that we can take the total look of the student rather than just what they've done while they're with us, because this is student level data. This is not school level data. So it's reflection on the student and how well they are prepared to go on to the next endeavor. And third and finally, given the lateness in the year and the difficulty in collecting the CCRI data and the training needed to do so effectively, we recommend that alternative schools receive a moratorium on A through F grades until the 18-19 school year, at which time we can actually take the time needed. First of all, it's March now. If you all say, hey, let's approve it as needed, and you recommend that to the board next month, that puts us in April. That means that we only have really a month to gather all the data for the 17-18 school year. And it's challenging, folks, especially with charter schools that we have people that wear multiple hats and they have to juggle multiple balls throughout the air. So we want to make sure that, just so you're aware, it's a very challenging feat. I really do want to thank. We had a group of folks that gathered this data and scrambled, and this is such a busy time of the year, and I just really, truly want to thank those that participated in this exercise for you all, and we are here if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Ms. Durkin.
Thank you.
So, Chair Geyer, as far as the final slide, I also want to thank all the participating schools that provided some sample data for exactly the reasons you said. And I would like to go on record of saying thanks about that.
We appreciate that.
Yes. Yes, I certainly agree with Dr. Susman on that one, that we put a lot of time and effort into gathering this data in a short time window. So,
I mean, I also want to thank Sue for actually putting it all together, because I know that it was quite a pile and quite a tangle. So I think you did a fantastic job. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Wayne.
Chairman Geyer, thank you for your presentation, because as I looked over everything that was sent to us over the week, the exact same thing, I was trying to make sense of it all, and I recognized that you were looking at student level data. A part of where I'm coming from is thinking about the number one, as you alluded to, how does this data get to the state level so that it can be processed by the state and they aggregate it together for the final letter grade? And then how does each of these parts that you've identified on the one chart fit into the total points, you might say, to determine what the letter grade is? So these are some additional questions and things that we have to try to figure out how it all fits together. And then as we then crunch that, looking at it, doing the analysis as to what would be an A or B. Would it fit within the current model somehow, or would it be a distinct model of its own? Because I do agree with you that you're working with a different population of students and completely different circumstances in looking at significantly different kinds of data points along the way. So what are the indicators of effective schools moving the students to where they're either college career ready or they come out with a skill of some sort successfully, and the sooner the better. So that's part, and it'll raise these questions for us to be thinking about and collecting the relevant data, aggregating it together, and doing the statistical analysis as to what would be appropriate A, B, C, D school.
And Chair Geyer.
Yes, Dr. Susman.
So this is kind of a question for Executive Director Williams, because I know that the State Board of Ed referred specific questions to the TAC about the alternative school model. And I'm wondering, am I going to try and do it from memory? I know one of the questions was about including accelerated credit recovery in the CCRI. One of the questions had to do with grad rate option 1, because that would need to be self-reported data. And I think I remember correctly that the third question was what Ms. Durkin included in the presentation is that the CCRI data could be collected throughout the student's high school career rather than just at the alternative high school of graduation. So my question is, are we answering those 3 questions at this point? And then, because Member Jordan brought up many other things that need to take place, such as even collecting the data. One thing about the model is that I think it may not be clear still, and we could go through the working draft, will need to be self-reported. And the State Board of Ed in October seemed to be okay with that until these questions were posed, and they deferred those questions to us. So
Chair Geyer,
yes.
members of the committee, I actually have those questions typed out from the meeting,
Okay.
which Director of Special Projects White transcribed for me, but they're sitting on my desk, so I'm having him scan them and email them to me so we can address those. If you just give me a moment.
All right.
Chair Geyer, if I can just answer Mr. Jordan's question. You asked how it would get to the state, and as Dr. Schlesman indicated, it would much of it would be self-reported, especially on the CCRI, but that's also for the traditional school model as well. The graduation rate, the 19, you would take it your graduation, the folks that are on January 30th, and you pull data on that day. So it would have to be self-reported. All of it's auditable, but again, that's what you would have to do. And my assumption is that we would be able to upload a spreadsheet of those students that are able to graduate January 30th. We upload it on February 1st. And then the end score, the end number would be those students who have graduated or have withdrawn and gone on to another school. So, but again, self-reported.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Durkin. I actually had a question, and I'm not sure if it's been answered. Some of the board directives, or those have covered sort of already my question. But when you were showing the CCRI and you were showing the different color categories, the purple and the red and the blue, and maybe there was a green or yellow in there as well. So the purple are the additional categories for the alternative schools. Is that is that understanding correct? Or
Purple and the yellow on the last one for the testing option. Let me pull it there. Thank you. Escape. Okay, so you have again, this is all from the K-12, or the, 9-12 CCRI to here, where you have this is the CTE coursework, the actual official going into and doing working on a car, etc. This is all presented on their document. This is from our document. So this one testing, and we had just the one test that we could pull from to indicate college and career ready is just the AZ Merit, and that's earning a partially proficient on the AZ Merit, Algebra 2 or English 11. And I think somebody was asking last time, and I can't remember, maybe it was Member Bachna, as to why we got rid of the Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and ELA off of proficiency. It's because it came here. It rests here now.
Got it. Thank you.
So, and then so these purple ones are both college and career ready.
Thank you, Ms. Durkin. So yeah, that sort of explains then my other question, which was what I was noticing as you were scrolling through the student level data, it was very clear that there was a lot of purple cells, shaded cells, but not a lot of the other colors, which
Correct.
definitely I think leads into the need for these additional indicators for the alternative schools, since many students can't meet the traditional indicators that are provided.
Correct.
So, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Chair Geyer, and some follow-up for that, too. When Ms. Durkin mentioned the second language, which you'll see up there as one of the purple additions, there was a letter of support that was provided by TESOL International for adding that element to the college and career readiness. I'm expressing support that there was more support than just the alternative accountability advisory group. The work study, as you see this, workplace readiness, career readiness, and service learning were supported with a letter from the National Dropout Prevention Center. And in fact, they've done a meta-analysis of showing what works to avoid dropouts, and service learning, work study, career readiness rate high. I'd be happy to provide that graph, or actually in the entire study, if the group is interested. And the idea of having some options within the alternative school model. I know that the College and Career Ready Index does that for traditional schools also, but especially important for alternative schools, and then also in the graduation category. That was supported by Momentum Strategy and Research, a group that's based in Denver but does a lot of work nationally on alternative accountability.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Susman. Is there any other questions from the committee for Ms. Durkin?
Well, not necessarily for Ms. Durkin, but to continue our discussion.
Yeah, continue our discussion, etc. Director Williams.
Chair Geyer, members of the committee, I'm going to put those questions that were transcribed from the board meeting. I'm going to print them. So if you want to take a quick 5-minute break while I do that, that would be okay.
Thank you, Director Williams. Yeah, we'll adjourn for 5 minutes.
Okay.
We'll call the meeting back to order. Director Williams, you want to give us some information on the documents that were provided by Ms. Becerra?
Absolutely, Chair Geyer, members of the committee, and Dr. Beardsley, I did just email it to you. So after the last technical advisory committee meeting, it was requested for board staff to bring back the questions that the board had in regard to the alternative education A through F system that Vice Chair Schlesman just talked about. So what we have in front of us are the questions that the board raised at the October 23rd State Board meeting. I have given a copy of the questions to Sue. So if Sue wants to try to answer any of these questions, especially around graduation rate and college and career readiness indicator, Sue has already spoken in regard to trying to generate 2 points or reduce to 1 point. So maybe she can just expand a little bit on that as well. And if the committee members have any questions.
Okay. Insofar as the grad rate with the college and career readiness for the position that we take on just earning 1 credit or 1 point versus 2, I think as you saw, it was challenging to get one of the points, even with just 1 point, was less than half of the students received that. Some schools it ends up being more because it's built into their curriculum a little bit more. What I would say is that for now, that 1 point is appropriate. If need be, that to give alternative schools a few years to kind of change their curriculum so that they can incorporate more of this into that. But I will say that every credit that we're taking away or moment that we're trying to give them something else, we're taking away from their core credits to earn their core credits, and they need to earn their core credits. That's one of the reasons they're coming to alternative schools. Many of them have 12 elective credits already. So my position would be that we keep it at 1. But over time, if you guys think that 2 is appropriate, that we do that in successive iterations of the A through F plan.
Could I ask for clarification on that? So with the traditional model, it's 1 point for a red indicator, 1 point for a blue indicator. You can get 2 points. So you're saying just 1 point overall?
Overall, 1 point purple.
Okay.
And as you can see from what we've collected, getting them to 1 point is a challenge.
Okay. Thank you.
I would add, and this is another factor we've discussed in the consortium in our discussions, that another critical factor is that we, as alternative schools, often don't have the students for 4 years, where the traditional schools typically do. We often have them for 1, 2, or 3 years at the most. So we have less opportunity to develop 2 full points.
Chair Geyer?
Yes. Yes.
Could I ask that we take these sequentially?
Sure.
Because the first question has to do with growth. So let's talk about that. And then the next question has to do with graduation rate. So let's talk about that. And then we can talk about the college and career readiness indicator. Would that work? So we know. Except we've already started the college. Maybe we should finish the college and career readiness.
We've done the college and career readiness.
I assume since we hadn't talked about growth at all today that we'd go with what we started with.
Well, so
I guess it's difficult because there's not an agenda like order to the items. It's just a list of possible actions from the board's meeting.
Okay.
It starts with growth, graduation rate, and then goes to college and career readiness. But
so can we do college and career readiness?
Director Williams, is the order of the items here that we discussed, is there any precedence for that?
Chair Geyer, members of the committee, I believe Ms. Durkin has been talking about graduation rate and college and career readiness. If she feels that she can answer the growth question, then that's fine. What I would do is, if everyone looks at their paper under where it says bullet points at bottom of executive summary in 4D, put a 1 next to the growth indicator, put a 2 next to graduation rate, put a 3 next to college and career readiness indicator, put a 4 next to should the alternative ed school be held at the same idea, and then put a 5 next to credit recovery. And then that way we have those numbered, so as we go through, you know which one's which.
Okay. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. 4 and 5 are all part of 3. Chair Geyer and Executive Director Williams, 4 and 5 are actually subsets of 3 because both of those questions are related to the college and career readiness indicator.
Chair Geyer, members of the committee, that's correct, but let's take them in order like you first suggested so that we can follow along.
I guess you could say that they're separate questions.
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 are separate questions about the college and career readiness indicator and could be taken individually in that regard.
So, Chair Geyer, on the growth indicator, the question about modeling the 4.5, if you look at the framework, which was passed out in the last meeting, growth, the category growth had 2 components. One was academic persistence, and one was credit earned. And the 4.5 credits, and the way it reads is students enrolled by October 1st who earn greater than or equal to 4.5 credits by the end of the school year, June 30th. So that is what the Alternative Accountability Advisory Group proposed for this working draft A through F, alternative A through F model. And that was what went out for public comment. And so the question that was raised to the board in October is that the 4.5 was, in a sense, arbitrary because it was based on the number of credits that students earn in traditional schools. So the question was, should it be the 4.5 just as a starting point? Or was there some way to collect data to know what a reasonable expectation would be? And that's one of the points that Momentum Strategy and Research have made, and that the Alternative Accountability Nationwide group is saying, are we basing our expectations for alternative schools on a traditional model still, or is it really based on alternative school data? The alternative schools in Arizona were hoping that the student-teacher course connection would be able to gather the data about credits earned so that we would have a basis here at ADE to set the minimum threshold. But unfortunately, the student-teacher course connection was not, schools did not submit that data in a uniform and consistent way. So ADE is not yet able to provide that data. So I think the question is, do we as the Technical Advisory Committee feel that it just needs to be a minimum, needs to be 4.5 for this first pass, and we'll revise it later? Or do we think there is some way to collect data and make this more of a data-informed decision rather than a best guess?
Thank you, Dr. Schlesman. For the clarification on this question based on the information in the handout, I was wondering if it was a question of whether we should stay at 4.5 or change it based on evidence. And yeah, from my perspective, if the 4.5 point value is generated from the traditional model, then more evidence-based information would definitely help us come to a better decision regarding whether it's 4.5, 4.0, 3.5, or so on. What a reasonable expectation of these schools is for this indicator, because if we set it at the bar at the traditional schools, we're going to set the model up for a lot of schools and not meeting that bar and ultimately failing on that indicator. That's just my thoughts on this based on what you were saying, Dr. Schlesman, and my concerns about leaving it at 4.5. We could do a test case, yes, but then we're going to run into the issue of schools objecting and on the grounds of traditional model-based value being used to set for a different type of school population.
Chair Geyer, let me clarify. The 5.5 is actually for the traditional schools because you have to earn 22 credits in 4 years. So 5.5 would be a traditional school, reasonable for that. That's what they should earn in a year. So 4.5 is...
Yeah. But, Chair Geyer, it is still arbitrary.
Right.
Because
Correct.
it was a best guess.
It was best guess.
It was a best
Correct.
guess. Okay, thank you.
It hasn't... There's been no data that we can say
Right.
that's been gathered.
So even in the alternative model, you have to earn 22 credits to graduate?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Chair Geyer, members of the committee, Ms. Durkin, is that data easily available? Are you able to do a survey of the alternative schools to determine how many credits are actually being received in a year? Going back to Chair Geyer's point of basing decisions upon evidence, I think it would only be best practice to allow some type of survey or more information to be presented to the technical advisory committee so that they can make a decision at a future meeting based upon sound evidence of what is currently going on in the alternative schools.
Executive Director Williams, Chair Geyer, you have that information.
So you have that information.
We collected that and gave it to you. It is on the big spreadsheet that you should have.
Yeah, Chair Geyer.
It's one of the things is how many credits they earned that year. But that was for graduates, so
That was for graduates, so it's not for the entire population.
It's anecdotal.
So it's still not what this component of the proposed model is trying to gather.
Dr. Schlesman, that would be correct.
Right.
It would be anecdotal with what we have. But
and also on that college and career readiness indicator, of the 12 sample schools, which is not taking anything away from gathering all the data, but only 2/3 of the 12 reported a college and career ready indicator. So it's not comparing apples to apples, because the college and career readiness indicator was for graduates, whereas this indicator is for all students.
All students, correct.
So it could be that when a first student spends his or her first year at an alternative school, that student does not earn 6 credits. Or I can't remember what the number was. It 6 point something? Mm-hmm. It could be that because we experience that as alternative schools, that when a student first comes, the student needs to spend some time getting back into schooling. Mr. Tucker shared that graphic that was the Garcia, and Dixon are the people that did it, about the development of an alternative education student. And sometimes the first stages are getting it together and getting back into school until the student actually starts earning credit.
That is correct. Thank you, Dr. Schlesman.
Yeah, Ms. Durkin, just to add to that, given that I'm expecting that alternate schools, students in those schools aren't taking a traditional 5.5 credit path to graduation. They're probably doing maybe even in spurts. Credits are coming in spurts, or their ebbs and flows, depending if they transfer or leave a school. So I think data and modeling on their evidence from different grade levels would be, or years would be useful in cohorts to see how that accreditation works.
And Chair Geyer, are you asking us to model that for you? Is that are you requesting that? Or?
Yeah, actually, Chair Geyer, I have a suggestion. So I don't know what the status is of having someone do the modeling, but rather than ask someone working in a school who has a different day job, and especially in March and April, to gather that data, if there would be, have we identified someone that works for the State Board of Ed that could do that?
Chair Geyer, members of the committee, currently at this time, the board team as well as the department is working on finishing the traditional 16-17 and looking into the future 17-18 iterations of the traditional models. So if you are requesting that the Department of Education or the board team look at anything, at this point we cannot do that.
Okay. So, Chair Geyer, that kind of anticipates a question that I was going to ask at the very end. So if we want to continue this discussion, that's fine. I don't know what our time frame is today, but I know. So, Chair Geyer, may I raise the questions and then we can say, let's wait on that and continue the questions that were referred to the TAC. May I raise those questions?
Yeah, yes, you may.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, Ms. Durkin, at the end of her presentation on behalf of the the Advocacy Committee of the Alt-Ed Consortium, talked about a moratorium on letter grades. So maybe if we would like to make a recommendation about that. It was not referred to us, so I don't even know what the protocol is.
Chair Geyer, members of the committee, today's agenda does not have any action on it, so the committee cannot take any action.
Okay. And then the second question I was going to have was, so it's not an action item, but where the alternative school model fits into the timeline that the State Board of Ed adopted at its last meeting. Because I am still not clear if that timeline includes the alternative school model or not. But again, so those are the questions. So they're out there.
Chair Geyer, nor are we.
Chair Geyer, members of the committee, I will look into that question and provide that at a future TAC meeting.
Thanks, Director Williams, because that would help us understand better, like in terms of planning, in terms of any potential modeling, which by no means, Ms. Durkin, was I expecting you to go out and model this whole thing for us and do all that work for us.
You, Chair
by no
Geyer.
means. I was just trying to get a sense of what kind of data we would need to get, which would be for those different grades or different cohorts.
And Chair Geyer, I think that's, thank you for saying that it would be better to make an evidence-based decision than even a best guess. Arbitrary.
Chairman Geyer, I'm in a K-8 district, so I'm not really sure what I'll get sent up to the state in terms of credits that students earn through the student course, teacher course student connection. So I'm thinking that if your students are getting credits in the alternative schools, is that data getting pushed up to the state? I'm trying to think of where that data might be riding to where once the state gets time, can they begin to process that data in some way so that we can get some ideas to the credits that students are earning throughout the year?
Chair Guy, I remember, Jordan, this is an issue that we had in the Alt-Ag that we spoke to members of the accountability group. The information is pushed up to the state. Yes, it's collectible. However, at least at the time, the information that was being pushed up was actually overriding the other stuff, and so it was really a challenge for them to collect it. Also, everybody submits the data differently. Either it's half credit, might be 0.1, might be a pass, a S. So collecting that data, trying to figure out how to collect that data on their end is challenging for them, and they say that that's impossible at this point. My thought on this, and my understanding from the Alt-Ag meetings, were that we would have to self-report that.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that the school can self-report.
Okay.
But as far as gathering it from the ADE, it's apparently, from what I recall from the meetings, it's an impossibility.
And I'm just trying to understand the model as it would apply, the current 8F model as it would apply to the alternative school. The proficiency rate, that would still include the AZ merit, right? Or,
yes.
Or alternative assessments beyond that. Right. And and then the growth, and then of course the graduation rate in the CCR, which is what you were alluding to today.
Correct.
So that makes it a little bit easier to understand. On the AZ merit, and here's my question: if you have a student that's passed it already, but they're still taking classes, might that affect an alternative school each year in their letter grade? Meaning, in terms of you have X number of students, but of that group, a subset of them have already passed AZ merit and met all the EOC requirements. What else would might that hurt alternative ed schools in accumulating points for proficiency? I guess that's my question.
Member Jordan, I'm not really sure what you're asking. Is that if they have met all of the requirements,
well,
chances are they're not going to be at our schools.
Okay, so if they meet the core requirements, then they're not going to be at your school. So you're focused primarily on the core requirements then?
I would say, if I may, Member Jordan, I'd say that I think what you're asking, the effect might be to lower the N value that we have for our proficiency rating. I mean, if we had,
that could be part
as we know with the EOC courses, every time a student is taking we may have had more of this problem with, say, AIMS, which was a cumulative test. But since each of these have EOC courses, if we have a student who needs to take Algebra 2, then he'll be taking the Algebra 2 AZ merit with us. If we have a group of seniors that have already taken their Algebra 2 elsewhere and they're graduating with us, that would simply lower the N value for our proficiency ratio.
Right, and that's part of what I was.
Yes, and
right.
Conceivably it could hurt us, but it's not a problem I would mind having so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Chair Geyer, Member Jordan, such anomalies exist, but it's definitely not the case. I mean, occasionally a student comes to an alternative school only needing a couple credits that are not core credits. So it does happen occasionally, but it is by far not the norm. So that student wouldn't be in and the interesting thing about the alternative model is we might have different denominators for different indicators. For example, for the proficiency indicator, it would only be those students who are eligible to test Arizona merit. Whereas the growth indicator would be credit earned all students, whereas the high school graduation rate would only be graduates.
So it's conceivable that you may have students coming to you where their total credit earned by the time they enter into your school is going to be very different. You may have one student who has only like 5 credits, and you may have another student who has 10 credits. Yeah. And so throughout the year, you may have one student who may be able to pick up the full 5 credits, the other one who doesn't need as many more to finish. And so now that reduces the total number available that you could sort of include in your model, or your part of the overall A to F model. That's going to be very, very different than what the traditional school is going to be. So kind of getting into that realm, I'm trying to think about how we might go about collecting the most relevant data so we can sort of begin to look at it somehow so that our analysis is going to be taking into things from a very fair and equitable manner. So that's... Yeah.
Chair Geyer, Member Jordan, that is a good observation. Thank you. Because when the business rules are written, I'm just going to, since we're talking about the growth indicator as credit earned right now, the numerator should be students who would be eligible to earn, and whatever the number is. Right now it's greater than or equal to 4.5, so that if you have the student that only needs 3 credits to graduate, that student would not be in the denominator.
And Chair Geyer, Member Schlesman, it would be also from October 1, so that the school has the opportunity to serve the student in that way.
And then, excuse me I'm going to jump in here one more time. So knowing that, it's conceivable that, and you probably have this conversation with your students, identifying where they are in terms of earning credit and where they could be by the end of the school year so that they could potentially graduate by the end of the year. So now of that subset, what percentage of those students actually meet that graduation point? So that's where I'm trying to make that connection between the credits earning through the year in relation to the graduation rate that might be impacted by that, whether positively or negatively.
Yeah, Chair Geyer?
Yeah, direct Dr. Schlesman.
This might be a good time for me to share my handout. If we could give it to all of us, and we might have one or two for the audience. I just returned from the National Alternative Education Conference, and on Wednesday, a woman presented about the accountability model that they are using for alternative schools in Portland. I actually was going to use the handout to talk about graduation rate, but since we're on the topic of credit attainment, I'll go ahead and mention it here. You can see on the handout that they use credit attainment in, and these are the Portland Public Schools. So it is and I asked her that question. It is a district model. It is not their statewide model in Oregon. But you see that they specify who the students are that are next to criteria that they must have attended. And so they didn't do it by a date. They did it by 45 plus days or 75 plus hours of enrollment. So that might be something that is considered when the business rules are written about credit attainment, and that they earn credits. They happen to do it by year. And you can see then that they break it down that if the student is, and actually I make sure I'm reading this right. So that they earn the 1.5 plus credits for less than 86 days of enrollment, and that's less than 150 hours, and then they continue in that way. So that's another option that might be considered when it comes to the point of writing business rules for credit earned in the growth indicator.
Chair Geyer and Member Schlesman, does that mean that it's basically the 45 days would essentially be a semester? Is that correct? Is that what you're less than a semester for? And is it 45 days to earn three credits?
I can take that question back to Kirsten.
Okay.
Because this.
It's 86 days to earn 3 credits, I think, on here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's the way I read it too.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like there's a minimum,
Member
Schlesman, of days attending school before the student's even counted toward this.
Right.
So if they drop out after 10 days, they're not counted.
Like that.
Any other discussion regarding the growth indicator? The next item 2 on the list is the graduation rate. Questions regarding the different options on how to calculate graduation rate and which grad rate should apply to a school. And there's recommendations from the alt ed community regarding schools self-selecting.
Chair Geyer, there was a question on the A through F proposal that we put out. It says it's school choice, whether they choose 1, 2, or 3. And I think I addressed that in my presentation that there's no one size fits all, even within the alt community. So I think giving us our best shot, and whatever of those 3 options, if the best of cohort works for this school, then best of cohort should be used.
So that would be applied school-wide?
Applied school-wide, yes.
Okay.
For individual, like I could choose one, and
Right.
Mr. Tucker could choose, yeah.
Right. Got it.
So, Chair Geyer, this is why I brought this handout, actually, was and we ended up talking about credit attainment. But this is where this idea of and Portland calls it a one-year graduation rate. Use whatever term would be better. But to have your denominator be those students who are graduation eligible. So as the presenter said, you wouldn't include in your denominator a student who enters your school with only 4 credits and expect that student are on pace to graduate. So I was just supplying this as a way. And again, this would be a great Arizona innovation because Portland is doing it in their school district, but I am not aware of any state that is calculating statewide graduation for alternative schools. And when you say this to the alternative school community, even nationwide, they all kind of look like this is finally something that makes sense instead of cohort-based graduation rate. And I wanted to have us think about one comment that I heard at the October State Board of Ed meeting when we talked about 3 options. One of the State Board of Ed members said, well, then how that's going to be even within alternative schools, how are we going to compare apples to apples if you have apples and oranges and kiwis? But and Ms. Durkin has made the point that even though we are all alternative schools, each alternative school is slightly different, and by at least giving the options, which was supported in that letter from Momentum Strategy and Research, you're giving schools some flexibility, and you still will have apples to compare to apples. You know, it may be out of the 100, I'm just going to round the numbers. If there are 150 alternative schools, there may be 50 who choose to do option 1. I have a hunch that it's going to be like 75 or closer, you know, because that is the most appropriate. But there are alternative schools that don't want to do their own calculations. ADE has the cohort-based best of. So there are going to be oranges to compare oranges with. And then the third option has not been calculated yet, but ADE could calculate it. And so there will be a group of Kiwis.
If I would suggest, I know we're not voting on anything, but in terms of schools choosing these options, I would want them to choose an option and stick with it for 2 or 3 years instead of vacillating between options time after time, because that will actually show us more than picking one and going to the next one, the next one, the next one.
Thank you, Member Bachner. I was actually thinking of that when I was talking a moment ago. Just the idea that we have a school and they choose one option, they try it on, they don't like it, they choose. I'm not saying that they're going to, depending on the courts, there be some sort of system-based stability expectation for requirement for the schools that they choose a model based on their cohort and they stick with it. I'm not exactly sure how you would go about doing that in terms of rules or the model, but thank you for that.
Yeah, Chair Geyer, and Colorado as a state does allow schools to choose at the beginning of the school year. So they can't wait until the end of the school year and then say, oh, what shows better for us or best? So they do need to make the commitment at the beginning of the school year. So that could
that helps that helps alleviate my concern. I had this vision of a middle of a school year choosing the model based on how things are going for their students. They didn't have a great first part of the year, so they choose the one that focused at the mid. You know what I'm getting to there? It's just don't want to have.
Might have the workplace essential skills because they need to go get a job, and that's embedded in our curriculum. But if another student might not need that, they just need to get their stuff and be done. So we need to be able to collect all of the data throughout their entire high school career. the first part of that question is where is the data generated? And like the traditional schools, much of it is self-reported, as I said. So that's the first part of that question.
Okay. Any other thoughts or discussion regarding the second point there? Regarding the entire career versus the time at the alt-ed school? Because I believe, that was already raised earlier. So, seeing any further discussion on that, we can move to the fourth point there, the fourth set of questions. Should the alt-ed school be held to the same idea of trying to generate 2 points, or should that be a reduced expectation of 1 point? Under the current model, it's based on the student earning 2 points. And this was actually the first item we discussed here. So, any additional discussion regarding the question of generating it based on 2 points expectation or 1 point? Member Schlesman?
Yeah, Chair Geyer, I have no further discussion. I know that we are not agenda to take any action today, but I would encourage us to agenda soon or at the point that data is collected to make a recommendation to the State Board of Ed regarding that question.
Okay. Thank you, Member Schlesman. Okay. And then the fifth point on here, it's really not a question. It's just concerns regarding, quote-unquote, credit recovery or encouraging credit in all types of activities. So definitely would like to get some clarification on the idea of credit recovery and then we're encouraging credit in all types of activities.
So, Chair Geyer, I know I, as an individual researcher, have concerns about including accelerated credit recovery in the College and Career Ready Index. And I have heard pretty split between the alternative school leaders whether they think that is a good idea or not. Because some would think that by encouraging schools to rapidly, if we're going to give points to schools in the College and Career Ready Index for accelerated credit recovery, I am not familiar, and I'm very open to anyone that has any research evidence that that is a good idea. I asked the woman in Portland, because you see credit attainment is on her model for alternative school accountability, and I raised the question. I said, well, what about the concern about credit mills, that if you reward schools for accelerated credit, that they will just crank out the credits? And in her position, because it is only in the district, she kind of smiled and said, yes, we had one principal at one alternative school that was awarding credit to generously, I'll put it nicely, and she actually replaced that principal. And my concern with the state of Arizona is that we did at one point have attestation that the schools signed that they were doing credit according to the standards, but I am not sure that that is currently the practice to collect those. And since we already have credit earned in the growth category, I individually have concerns about also awarding accelerated credit recovery in the College and Career Ready Index. I know the LA Times did an investigative reporting about credit recovery at LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, and there were many questions about, they did increase the graduation rate for all schools, but they were concerned that students were really learning the content. And you may know Russ Rumberger's work. He was awarded the American Educational Research Association Book Award for his book, Dropping Out, Why Students Drop Out of High School and What Can Be Done About It. And I've talked with him about whether there is any evidence for accelerated credit recovery, and he did not have any. So that is my individual research or concern.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Schlesman. So just to kind of follow up on what you were saying regarding the sort of double valuation of credit earning for the individual student, credit earning potential of individual students by including it in both the acceleration readiness as well as a growth indicator. It seems like if we set some standard for the growth indicator, if a student passes that standard, they have a much higher chance of also potentially getting into that accelerated CCRI bucket of actually earning credits. And then if we make the target for that 1 point, they could potentially earn a good portion of that requirement for that indicator just from that alone. So it does definitely incentivize for alt-ed schools from the board meeting, at least the ones in the summary. The 5 point from the summary here. Director Williams?
Chair Geyer, are you referring to the handout I gave you?
Yes, I am referring to the handout.
Yes, those were the 5 questions that were scripted from the board meeting on October 23rd that came from the board members to this technical advisory committee.
So again, we don't actually have any agendaed action to take today regarding these 5 question points from the state board meeting on October 23rd. However, it was useful to discuss and review those, and potentially we can move to the 3rd agenda item, which addresses future meeting dates and items for future agendas. So Director, Member Schlesman.
Yeah, Chair Geyer. So perhaps my questions about if Director Williams would talk with the State Board of Ed and find out if they want when they expect us to get back to them with responses on those 5 questions. That's number 1. And so then number 2 would be, is it within our purview as the TAC to talk about how the alternative schools fit into the timeline? Or is that a State Board of Education discussion? And number 3 was the idea of a moratorium. Does the State Board of Ed want feedback from us? Because we did talk about the importance of having something evidence-based as a decision, not even a best guess. So those are the 3 things for future agendas, trying to clarify what our role is. Well, obviously we have those questions to answer. That one has been given to us. But then the latter 2, is that a State Board of Ed decision, or do they want to defer some or send some questions to us to get our take on what they should do?
Thank you, Dr. Schlesman. Director Williams, regarding that for future agendas, it would be helpful to have like an agendized, depending on what sort of feedback from the TAC the board is looking for, have either agendized call for action on some of these questions or just discussion and further review based on any additional evidence that we can receive regarding the growth credit cutoff. So Director Williams, do you have any?
Chair Geyer, I'm not sure what answer you're looking for. I believe you're telling me you would like for a future agenda, you'd like feedback in regard to what Dr. Schlesman just stated, and then you are looking for action and discussion review agenda items for the growth credit.
Depending on the recommendation of the board for that,
okay.
Yes. Per the board's recommendation, yes. What? Member Bachna, did you?
Chairman Geyer, Director Williams, I am interested in discussing what we're doing for the 17-18 letter grades, traditional letter grades, in terms of the CCRI. in terms of how AIM Science is going to come into the CCRI. I'm also interested in discussing the new menu of assessments and how that's going to play out going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Member Bachna. Any other?
This is Member Beardsley. I would like to underscore the importance of discussing this menu of assessments, and to Chairman Geyer and Member Susman, Dr. Haladina did send us a memo on this as well, so we might want to add that to the agenda for next meeting.
Could you repeat that, Member Beardsley?
The whole thing? So
Chair.
just to underscore the importance of discussing this new menu of assessments for the A through F accountability system, and then the PDF file that Member Haladina sent us, which is Chairman Geyer, Member Schlussman, and Director Williams on February 28th. If we could just forward that to everybody, that might facilitate some of the discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Member Beardsley.
I also think we might need to revisit the end count discussion that we had, not in terms of lowering the end count, but in looking at alternative ways for schools to get to that end count, perhaps by considering combining across subject areas.
Okay.
Member Geyer, I had that idea of the end count discussion because I did live stream the State Board of Ed meeting, the last one, and I see where the pressure is coming from about lowering the end count because someone from the chamber spoke about that, and then there was also a Latino advocacy group. I don't remember the name of the group, but I would like the TAC. We responded to the end count issue twice, that statistically and methodologically it is not stable to lower the end count, but the idea of looking at other ways to address end count. So I doubt that the State Board of Ed will put the end count issue as a question back to us, but I would also like us to kind of push out that we have taken a stance twice about lowering the end count as far as from technical concerns, and I would like to have that repeated to the State Board of Ed if they ask again our advice about the end count.
Any further items for future meetings or agendas?
The board's interest in having letter grades for K2 and K3 schools for 2018.
Okay, Director Williams. Any other items regarding future agenda items or future meeting dates? I believe we're now on a regular meeting schedule, which is nice. We're going to have our next meeting on April 13th at 12 noon. So that'll be our next regularly scheduled meeting. If there are no further discussion regarding item 3, which is future agendas, we can move on to the adjournment. And do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
I second the motion.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 So the Technical Advisory Committee is adjourned at 1:35. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.